Holding space is about being present without an agenda, while also having a sincere openness for a deeper truth and beauty to be seen. Let's remember that the space that we share is so much more important than anything that might come out of my mouth. If anything, this is all poetry. And there's a magic that happens when we come together in this way without all the hangups, without even the hangup of thinking that I'm a teacher. I'm looking within what I am. I'm seeing something beautiful and I'm sharing that beauty, which for me speaks to the fundamental point and opportunity of being human. Discover something beautiful on the inside of what you are and then share it with the world. Welcome to the program, Holding Space for Love to be Seen. This is episode 22. And this is going to be interesting. It's an interesting topic today, this evening, or morning or afternoon. Who knows when you're listening? If this is your first time, I'm going to hang out here for an hour. Folks are watching live. And I'm going to speak to the topic for today. And on this episode 22, the topic is the big, bad, super cute ego. An opportunity to unravel some innocent confusions about what the ego is or is not, and allowing ourselves to possibly transform our relationship with this something called the ego so that we can see that it is neither in the way or is it a problem. But rather, more accurately, it's our misunderstanding of what it is that creates all the resistance and the difficulty. And so this is part of what I do on this program is I investigate what topic is inspiring for me at the moment, what I'd like to speak to, what I'd like to share insight about. And then in some way or another, it translates into a holding space that allows us to see, feel, and share more love. Because naturally, this expression that feels like love is lacking, love is missing, along with everything else we heartfully crave, it only appears to be lacking because of an innocent misunderstanding. It's here, present, alive, and well. It's just not seen. And through our conditioning as human beings, we look for it in the most disastrous of places, much of which, if only of which, is in the mind's content, in the imagination. We could also say in the past and future, but that's still just the imagination. We could say somewhere out there in the world, but that's still looking in your imagination. We're looking for what is real in that which is imaginary, and it's not going so well. So we're going to bring some clarity as to where these things really are, which invites us to be still and connect with reality, connect with life. The underlying theme of everything I talk about is to discern the difference between what you imagine to be happening and what is really happening, which has also been the primary spiritual invitation throughout time, said in so many words: be still and know. See what's real, surrender the unreal. And in doing so, you will connect with what it is you're actually looking for in this life, which in summary could be said love, compassion, and freedom. The format of this program is the introduction, which is happening now. Then we're going to hang out for 2 minutes in stillness. I'm going to play some nice music in the background. And it's just an opportunity to honor this space. For me, it's my favorite part of the show where I can just fully allow myself to be here without any rush, without needing to get beyond the stillness, but recognizing that that's the real value, is just being here. And the more we can just allow ourselves to be here, if we're going to hang out here together for an hour, then it's important to take that moment and let yourself settle in to this space. It will also contribute to allowing ourselves to be more open to receive whatever it is life might want to show you. And then after that stillness, I'm going to run my mouth for a bit on this topic. And I tend to write before I do these shows something called pre-broadcast reflections, PBRs, as we like to call them here in the office. And it's just 4 to 1,000 words of me writing about the topic, kind of setting the tone. And then that goes out to the membership community, which is free. As soon as it's posted, it goes straight to your email. And you can read that and kind of prepare yourself for the live broadcast or read past ones. People like that too. But I guess that's a good promo opportunity to invite you to check out the Inlight Connect community on the website inlightconnect.com/go. There's a very short, brief application process where I just ask you a couple questions and then that gets sent to me or somebody behind the scenes. And we just kind of make sure it's a good fit based on your answers, especially eliminates a lot of nonsense and a lot of spam. But it is free. And once it's approved, which is immediately or 72 hours, then you get all signed up. You get access to the website, the content. You can watch recordings of this program. You can watch live. There's some free courses in there. There's just great community interaction, and there's a mobile app. You can download the mobile app and get all access to this kind of stuff on your phone, which I guess that's what all the cool kids are doing nowadays. It's all about the phone. So check that out. After I ramble a bit, there's typically some time for Q&A for those watching live, Q&R actually, as we're referring to it now, which is questions and reflections. Not sure if we're going to do that today, but we'll see. And then we'll end with a short and sweet guided meditation. And this introduction is running quite long, so we're just going to jump into the 2 minutes of stillness and just inviting you to hang out with me for a bit. All right. I like that time. So let's just dig into this, shall we? Feels like there's a lot to say about this. And as always, we have an imaginary 60 minutes to hang out with each other. And so there's the play of limitation, which is a fun challenge to somehow communicate a message that summarizes something that I could literally talk 7 days for at a retreat, which is what I love about retreats. We can get together and hang out and dive into these things. But the topic, the big, bad, super cute ego, I find this concept interesting for a couple reasons. One is because there's a popularity around it, a popularity around the concept of ego, whether it's in psychological circles or spiritual circles. There's a lot referenced to that. For myself, I'm not always such a big fan of what other people might have to say about this, that, or the other without deeply investigating my own experience and finding what feels profoundly simple and true. So, as a note of caution, I invite you to do the same. That I'm not someone to listen to and just assume that what I'm saying is relevant for you, because you could be interpreting what I'm saying in a way that's entirely off the mark of my intention, which happens all the time. I guess to begin, we should probably clarify terms like the term of ego. What is it? In the most simple and direct and practical way, for myself, what I see is that the ego is simply who I am thought to be. The character in the mind that presents itself when I think about something called me. And this is fascinating to explore because everyone has this. Everyone has a character in their mind that they think they are. And this character is built on over a lifetime. It's a story that continues to unfold. And in a direct way, I could say that it is our relationship with the ego that is the source of our human struggle that is defined as sufferable. That might be a bit of a big statement, but I think it's rather obvious the more that we look at it, which is what we'll do. It's not uncommon for this term, ego, to be seen as a villain, to be seen as something that's in the way. And if only there wasn't an ego, then you could somehow capture the peace that you're looking for. Or there's all sorts of invitations to try and destroy the ego, to get rid of the ego, to kill the ego. And taken literally, we really miss the point, which happens quite often, especially in spiritual language. I could tell a fantastic story or pointing that speaks to allowing the ego to die, but it's not speaking to the reality of that happening. It's illustrating a picture that invites something profound to be seen that there isn't really words for. Because, of course, I'm not suggesting that you literally kill this something that isn't even alive. And that's a great place to start or continue. To recognize that this character in the mind, who you are thought to be, which comes with the name, comes with the story, it comes with anything that is a thought related to a personal sense of identity. That would be ego. It is a product of the mind, and whatever product of the mind, it is also imaginary, meaning that whatever the mind sees is to see its own creation, to see its own imagination. This is beautiful, by the way. It's not a problem, especially when seen in its appropriate context. Let's just recognize that for a second, even if it seems simple, to discern the difference here. That who I am thought to be does not actually exist in reality. Meaning, the character that I can imagine right now of Tiger, that character's not actually here in reality, in life. The character only exists in the imagination. And the function of this character is required for being a human being. It's unavoidable. It plays a particular function that helps us go about having this human experience. And I would even suggest that it contributes, seen in the appropriate context, to a playful experience of being a human being. In the same way of when you go and watch a movie, you see characters in the story. And the experience of going to a movie can be enjoyable. That movie could not be without characters. The experience of relating couldn't happen in the way that it does without characters. And part of the dance of characters in our human expression is it presents an opportunity for learning. It presents an opportunity for discovery. It's deeply integrated into the experience of being human. It's part of it. Where does the challenge arise? Well, there's an illustration here that comes to mind that I've spoken about many times before, but it seems particularly relevant if we were to investigate when does the problem arise with the ego. Directly said, it's when you mistake the ego for reality, when you think it's real. And then we try to protect and defend that which is only imaginary, thinking it's real. In the same way, if we're playing a game of Monopoly and you think the money is real, you're not fun to play with. You get serious, you get agitated, you get scared because you've mistaken the points for something that's real. And you see how innocent that is? Again, not a problem. It's just an innocent misunderstanding. But you can see how easily that can happen. where you get wrapped up in the experience and you think the game that you're playing, which exists for the sake of play, is somehow a serious thing where you could potentially lose something that's real, lose something that isn't merely imaginary. I forgot to set the do not disturb on my phone. Very, very simple, yeah? This experience of taking the game as something that's real and subsequently missing the opportunity of play is exactly what happens with the imaginary character that we have, where we take it to be real and then shit gets serious. Likewise, just like when you're playing a game, you can, over time, amass a lot of imaginary points, a lot of things that you imagine to mean something about you. And yet, what it really is little pieces of paper that have no value. But in our experience with the ego, living a life repeatedly building on this story and believing more and more that it's real, the last thing we want to see is that it's not real. And this also points to the fundamental difficulty in the human experience of a lack of willingness to see the truth of things. We don't want to see the truth of things because it threatens the illusions that we're holding on to. In the same way of playing a game, you can tell a beautiful story about all these points that you have. And you don't want someone coming along and saying, hey, did you know that those points aren't real? Which is why I wouldn't be surprised if this show was never popular. Because at first glance, it's not inviting to have your illusions destroyed. And again, it's a way of speaking because illusions are imaginary. They can't actually be destroyed. It's a way of speaking. This is wise to recognize and to see how fundamental this is. That as human beings, there's something in us that doesn't want to see the truth of things, doesn't want to acknowledge a reality where who we think we are is only imaginary. Partly because we're not in touch with the reality of what we are. And to not be in touch with the reality of what you are, and then to have the potential of seeing the ego doesn't exist, can be really scary. Which, of course, is why there's usually a huge defensiveness. Which is why the ego can become violent. In fact, we could even go so far as to say that anytime the ego starts acting crazy, becoming violent, it's because it's approaching the discovery of seeing its own imaginary nature. And it doesn't want to see that. What I can promise you, though, is that the reality of what you actually are beyond this character is not concerned about the ego's disappearance, isn't scared. So part of the invitation here, always and forever as I speak, is to pull the curtain back little by little, or a lot by lot, and open the eyes of your heart and see what's true about you, and to have a willingness to surrender that character. And when I say surrender that character, what I mean is to acknowledge its imaginary nature, acknowledge that the points are imaginary, acknowledge that no matter how many imaginary points you gather, they're still going to be imaginary, which is really, really interesting. One thing to pay attention to as it relates to the big, bad, super cute ego is to recognize that it's on this quest of capturing more points and avoiding the loss of the points it thinks it has captured. And this is something that you can just observe in your own human experience without any judgment. Just be fascinated by it, because it's happening all the time, which again can be part of the play. This is also why I refer to the ego as super cute. Because again, the ego exists in a world of imagination. This might be a leap to see, but see if you can go with me there. The ego exists in a world of imagination, meaning that everything it does inside of a world of imagination. It doesn't actually affect reality. Now, the ego can have a big argument with that one, because it can certainly look like it affects reality. But in the same way, the monopoly money can look real. But behind all of the stories, behind all the projections, the money is nothing. And so no matter what story you tell about the money, the points, it doesn't affect the reality of those points, which means nothing. This points a little bit to how lost we can get in those stories. It's almost as if it's just layers upon layers. And so often we can theoretically escape one layer just to find ourselves in another layer, thinking we got out of the layers, but we're still fully immersed in the layers. Again, it's wise to approach this with a beginner's mind, to not assume that you have discovered the thing, but more so just be open and curious to how deep this goes, because it goes really, really deep. The ego exists in a world of imagination. In the same way that when you go to a movie, what you see happening in the movie does not come out of the movie. You see why reality isn't concerned about the ego? It would be like me watching a movie concerned about the characters in the movie. Now, if you identify with the characters in the movie, which is in a way to put yourself in the movie, then you'll have concern about what happens in the movie, in the imagination. But when you can sit back and observe and discern the difference between a reality and imagination, it's very clear that whatever's happening in the movie stays in the movie, which invites a beautiful recognition that there's nothing to be afraid of in reality, which I spoke to a little bit in the first broadcast today. Okay, so if there's the ego that is determined to be real, which is what happens when it's believed to be real. So it's not necessarily that the ego is doing this on its own. It's actually being fueled. It's being fueled by an assumption, a misunderstanding, which makes perfect sense. What exists beyond the ego? Who are you if you're not the ego? Now, remember I talked about the difference between imagination and reality? What I invite us to recognize in this moment is that all of the words that I'm using to communicate are products of the imagination. In a direct way, it's impossible to speak the truth about these things because I'm using words which are in the realm of imagination. And so how do you use the imagination to discover that which is not imaginary? This is a caution in believing anything that I'm saying. I don't want anyone to believe what I'm saying because I know what I'm saying isn't true. I'm seeing what's true, and I'm playfully using words as an attempt to point to what's true. But if you stay in the realm of imagination, which is effectively to cling to my words, to believe or not believe my words, it misses the point entirely. And as I speak, some people will go, "Oh, I see that." And it's not something that you see in the imagination. You see it in your experience before the mind even comments on it. It's like it's self-evident. It's self-evident and you can't even describe it. For example, if you were out walking in the evening time and then you get captured by a sunset, right? Beforehand, you were off thinking in your mind this, that, and the other. And then you look up at reality and you see this sunset and you're just like, oh, you get snapped back to reality. And you can tell somebody, yeah, I'm seeing a sunset and it's beautiful. But does that statement really describe the experience? Does that touch upon the reality of what you're actually seeing? No, you can't actually communicate it. You can tell a story, you can paint a picture, but no matter what is created from the mind, it'll only be a representation of something that is a million times more magnificent than what you say about it. Which is the beauty of discovering what you really are. You won't be able to say but you'll see. It's like, and this has been referred to throughout time spiritually. One way that it's pointing to, in my opinion, is to give sight to a blind man. Like someone is touched by the truth and they were blind, but now they see. For me, that is a story that attempts to point to something profound, right? Whether it's true or not is irrelevant to me. It's absolutely irrelevant because that's not the real miracle. That physicality of being blind and then being able to see, as cool as it might be, it pales in comparison to seeing the truth of life. You could be blind and still see the truth of life and have your mind blown and heart open in ways you didn't know were possible. The doorway into seeing the truth of what you are beyond the ego this doorway has been painted 1,000 different ways throughout time. And us silly humans take these doorways literally. For example, I think this is a Bible thing. It could be a Buddhist thing. No, it was a Jesus Bible thing where somebody came up to Jesus and said, I want to follow you, dude. And Jesus says, okay, go sell everything you own and then come follow me. And the guy hesitates. Right? So you see that pointer, and then to take it literally, it says, oh, if I'm going to discover the truth of life, I have to go sell everything I own. Right? That pointer is speaking to a doorway. And that doorway being to investigate what it is that you put before this discovery. What's more important than this discovery? Imposing that invitation to sell everything you own kind of invites you to see what you think is more important. Because the opportunity of this discovery is the greatest gift to be seen in the human experience. However, there's 10,000 illusions, product of imagination, that we think are more important than this gift. And isn't it true that throughout your journey of life, you gently release all of those illusions? Right? Because at one point you thought XYZ was important, and then you thought ABC was important. And we exhausted ourselves chasing these things, trying to hold on to these things. And then over time, we just started to realize, wow, that's just not important. It's not what I thought it was. Right? You see these illusions crumble over time. And as they crumble, we become more available on the inside of what we are to see what's true. We have less things that we're carrying. We have less things that we're holding on to. And the more that we release the unreal, the more available we are to experience what's real. Part of the opportunity to release the burden of ego is simply through observation and awareness. Again, it's not to go and kill it. It's to be aware of what's going on, to watch your human experience, not to judge it, not to try and change it, just bring awareness to it, because the lack of awareness is what creates the whole dilemma. Right? The shenanigans of the ego that takes things personally, that tries to defend its imaginary character, that holds on to silly ideas of identity. All of this is happening because there's a lack of awareness of what's actually real and true. It's like we're just going along with the narrative without ever questioning it. Luckily, there's this thing called suffering, which is a sort of alarm that attempts to wake you up. Because when there is suffering, there is definitely an attachment to this character. And this character is holding on to the unreal to the extent that it is suffocating itself. And the message of suffering, in so many words, is let go. Surrender the burden. The big, bad, super cute ego. In the pre-broadcast reflections, I added a little Bitmoji of myself in a devil costume, which I think is right on point as it relates to the ego. Now, I want to say some things here which I feel bring a lot of clarity to the nature of ego and how it operates. If we can explore this without clinging to any dogma, put it that way. And I know that's an impossible invitation because that's what we tend to do as human beings, for some who are listening. Throughout religious traditions, the speakers of these pointers, in their attempt to communicate something that can't actually be spoken, tell stories that invite you to see beyond the story. Right? It's like, how do I tell you about something that can't actually be touched by words? Right? Like, if you don't have a sense of taste, right? Imagine you were born without a sense of taste and you ask me what vanilla tastes like. I can't even tell you. So what I can do is use words and stories to illustrate what it might be like. Or if you were colorblind, what is green? What is purple? What is orange? I'll tell a beautiful story, but that doesn't mean you'll see it. The story I'm referring to that has been told, again, in 1,000 different ways, but from a biblical context, it's the story of the devil. The story of the devil attempts to articulate the nature of the ego. It's so fascinating how we can take these things literally and completely miss the underlying message being pointed to. It's just fascinating. And then we cling to our stories as if they're real, and then defend those stories to death, to the point of suffering. Because to find out that the story isn't true, but is a pointer, somehow destroys the identity we've built up around that story. Which makes perfect sense. Again, why we wouldn't want to see beyond the story. Why something inside of us almost seems like it refuses to allow us to see beyond the story. Especially because something in us can resonate with the story, right? The story points to something and there's a resonance. And so we think there's resonance. It must mean the story is true. Do you recognize that? Rather than it's the resonance what's true. But the character in the mind can't define the resonance. And so in order to hold on to it, in order to capture it, it tells a story and then holds on to the story, which is a very quick way to suppress the resonance. That's a whole nother video. But the story of the devil. And I'm not a scholar in these things. And so I'm going to retell this story in my own words and see if you can see the pointing. So there's a bunch of angels in heaven with God. And all of these angels are worshiping God, celebrating God, enjoying heaven. And then one of these angels is in this party and everyone's worshiping God. And this angel says, "But what about me? Why is no one worshiping me? Why is everyone just worshiping this God? I want to be God." And that's not permitted in heaven in such a way that the reason why heaven works is because there's a certain order to things. And this particular angel is threatened by that order because it doesn't validate his imaginary sense of self-importance. And so he gets frustrated and essentially banishes himself. I know it might have been spoken that he was banished, but I would suggest that it's a self-banishment. He doesn't want to participate. He wants to do it his own way. He wants to be worshiped. He wants to be God. And so he falls from heaven, and in some capacity or another, he becomes what is known as the devil, which is that is in opposition to God. And in opposition to God because he wants to be God. You know what else this is like saying? He wants to be real. Right? Because everyone's worshiping the one God that's real. And he wants to be real. And so he goes on his journey of trying to be God and creates hell in the process. Hell being a space where there is only suffering, where there is eternal suffering. You know what that is? It's deep suffering. You know what it's not? Forever. Eternal is not a construct of time. Eternal is a construct that points towards depth. And we as human beings, in our belief of time, have interpreted the word eternal to mean forever and ever in the construct of time. That's not the case. Eternal is a depth of this moment. And as a human being, I think it's safe to assume that you've experienced eternal suffering where it seems like it's never going to end, where it seems so deep you can't get out of it, where it seems like this is now your sentence. And from that space of hell, life becomes full of judgment, condemnation, resentment, guilt, blame, and all flavors of the fearful. All stemming from what? In a manner of speaking, trying to be God. In another manner of speaking, trying to make the imaginary character real, which also comes with trying to be validated, which is being worshipped. Prove my existence. Prove that I'm real. Worship me, validate me. Is this not the mantra that we've been sold? Is this not what we do as a human species, celebrating the separateness in human beings? Apparently validating some over others, worshiping our ideas of them, the unreal, putting them up on a pedestal. And again, in a manner of speaking, putting them before God. And is there not something in you that's trying to be that? Do you see this aspect of ourselves in our human misunderstanding, which again has been there since the beginning? And I'll tell a story about that. But there's something in us as human beings that, in a manner of speaking, is trying to be God rather than letting God be God. Which is like saying, trying to make the unreal real rather than letting the real be the real. And why do we not want the real? Because in the real, who you think you are doesn't exist. And so in the real, you die, which makes perfect sense why there's the resistance to the real from the unreal. And right, the unreal is referred to as the dark. And the dark's trying to take over the light. That illustrates the playful battle. There's not really a battle. God is unconcerned with the shenanigans of the devil in this manner of speaking. I'm very clear about this manner of speaking because I'm not trying to validate stories. I'm pointing with words. So to continue on this theme in bringing clarity to this confusion, there's another story in the Bible that I feel illustrates this nicely of how we found ourselves in this predicament. And it doesn't only speak to the origin, but it speaks to the origin within the individual. And that is the story of Adam and Eve. You know what? This could actually just be another video. because there's a lot that I'd want to say about it to make it more clear. So actually, I'm going to hold off on that because I've already gone over my playful allotted time for this program. Maybe it's a bit of a cliffhanger to come back again. But yeah, you guys are feeling it. Yeah, it's amazing. Isn't it extraordinary how we can take these ancient stories and think it's important if the story is true or not, rather than seeing what the story points to? Because what the story points to is so much more profound than if something was or was not thousands of years ago. Right? It's like we want it to be true 1,000 years ago because it gives us something to hold on to. What are you holding on to? A story. What are you holding on to? The imagination. One of the reasons it's irrelevant for me is it's impossible to know. Right? Even if somebody presented 1,000-page document of evidence that said this is what happened, it's like, okay, cool. I don't know though. I don't need to know. It's not relevant in reality, in here and now, in such a way that here and now is already complete. It doesn't need to be completed by some story of the past. I'm glad you guys enjoy that. I love talking about these things in religious context because I feel there's so much innocent misunderstanding that clings to story and misses the real beauty of the message. And for me, a greater practicality about the message. And there can be such a playful destruction in clinging to the stories and then defending those stories and then judging other people who don't believe the same stories that you believe, which again is all an attempt to make your character real, right? The stories my character believes in are more real than the stories your character believes in. And if your character stories are proved to be true, then it disproves my character stories, which means my character isn't real. So I am going to go to war in order to protect my story. It's an issue of life and death for the ego, even though the ego will never be alive, but the ego doesn't see that when there's a belief energizing the potential for the ego's existence. Whew. All right. Let's wrap up with a guided meditation. Man, there's so much to explore. This is so much fun. I really enjoy this show. And I playfully made a decision a couple hours ago that instead of 4 live broadcasts a week, I was going to do 2 because doing 4 is a lot of work. But it's only a lot of work in the context of the post production and delivering this content. Maybe I don't need to deliver all the content and I can just show up live and then put the recordings in the community, which is totally possible. I tend to overcomplicate these things, and that could definitely be happening. Maybe I'll continue to do 4. Maybe I'll do 2. Maybe I'll do 1. I don't know. But we'll just follow the flow and see what happens. But there are other projects that I'm involved in other than doing live videos that I like to give my time and attention to. Yeah, Jane, what is sin? Oh, goodness. Another beautiful, innocent misunderstanding that's actually something that's beautiful to recognize. Yeah, it'll be another video or video series. All right. I guess before we do this meditation, get out of here, I will just invite you to explore the opportunity of coming on retreat. And I guess if you're watching the recording, you might have to get updated if that's still happening, but it seems to be fairly consistent. Doing 2 retreats a year, one at the end of March, and then one at the end of September or early October. Seems to be happening in Portugal, where I live now. Naturally, that could all change. But I do have a retreat scheduled March 24th through the 31st. It's for 12 people. And you can get on inlightconnect.com to find out more about that. It's super casual. It's just open-hearted human beings coming together, hanging out for a week. And we dive into these things and have our minds blown and our hearts open. And we discover a profound love for all that is, bringing a healing to how you see yourself, how you see others, and how you see all of life. And if that's not for you, then get signed up for the free community at inlightconnect.com and participate there. If you dig these things, if not, then it's definitely not the space for you. All right, let us do a guided meditation. There can be so much noise in the mind. Yet to come back to reality, there's no noise at all. There is only a stillness where all the appearance of things come and go. Let's connect with that stillness. Let us melt into the space that allows for all things to be. Let us be open to see life with brand new eyes. May we surrender the fantasy. May we surrender the illusions, allowing them to be what they are, an expression of play. But they do not hold the prize you're looking for. They do not hold reality. They do not hold what is true. Even if it's just for right now, we can lay those things down and come home to the real. We're going to end with 3 deep breaths and allow the totality of what we are to embrace the reality of this moment. And on the exhale, we will release all that is not here right now. Let's breathe. My friend, you've already been given the only gift there is. The truth of life contains everything you could possibly crave. Because what you really crave is a craving for what is real. What you really crave is the truth of life. And that gift has already been given. May we open the eyes of our heart and discover a profound willingness to truly see life. Thanks for meditating with me today. All right, my friends. Thank you for hanging out with me for this hour. This was a nice way to wind down my evening. Until next time, aloha and cheers to the beauty that you already are.